Before we get started, I wanted to thank everybody in my Discord, including Riley, Kane, along with Tokyo Tint, Dark Matter Wolf, Snake, Hikari, and Red for helping me brainstorm some ideas when it comes to reworking the original heists in GTA Online. This is something that I think a lot of us have been wanting for a very long time now. And thanks to some changes that Rockstar has made, thanks to Criminal Enterprises, the possibility of Rockstar eventually revisiting the original heists and reworking them could actually happen one day. Now, some of you are probably asking, GB, why rework the heists? Aren't they fine? Well, for the most part, they're okay. But how many times have you been wanting to do a heist, or a friend of yours, and you get on board? Say you're both waiting for two other people to show up, whether they're two friends or two randos, and you're just sitting there, and you might get a third person, right? But then the fourth person never comes. It's not easy to find four people to do a heist unless you just happen to have three other people that are just into the heist hardcore. Plus, if you go the rando route, you really don't know what you're going to get with randos. Sometimes they're good. Most of the time, it's nightmare fuel trying to deal with the randos for any of these heists, which ends up being a big waste of time. So my idea for reworking the heist is make it to where it is obviously going to be optional for 2 to 4 players with some additional changes, some lootables that you could also acquire for additional cash for the finales, and the ability to hire ally NPCs to help you with the setups as well as the finales. With my rework ideas for these heists, it is my hope to make the heists fun again, refreshed, replayable, and might even lead to more people playing the heists and grinding them on a regular basis. And it would be a lot more enjoyable for players if they had the option to play with 2 players or 3 players or even 4 players instead of being forced to try and find 4 players to do these setups and finales. By the way, if you have any thoughts, ideas, how you would like to see the original heist reworked, feel free and let us know below in the comments section. Credit to Rockstar, they did boost the finale payouts for Fleeca, Prison Break, Humane Labs, Series A funding by 75% and 50% for Pacific Standard. They also made the minimum cut for the finales 15%, and the Heist Crew setup cost has been reduced down to $25,000. Now, the only heist I'm not going to rework because I don't think it's necessary is Fleeca or Fleeca or however you wish to pronounce it. The only thing I'll include in every finale, including Fleeca, is additional lootable bonus cash valuables that you can also pick up on your way out the door. Since the first finale takes place in a very small bank on the GOH, not much room there, so I think you'd have the option to either grab some additional loose cash or a statue in the safety deposit box area that hasn't been put into a box, or perhaps you can have the ability to rob the tellers and get some extra cash out of them. But that's the only change or addition I would add to the first heist in the series of heists, because it's already set up the way I want it to be set up. It's a 2-player, and that's going to be the requirement for the heist going forward, is it's going to be optional 2 to 4 players instead of mandatory 4 players for Prison Break, Humane Labs, Series A funding, and Pacific Standard. And here's additional lootable bonus cash valuables that you could pick up doing these various finales. Confiscated items inside some sort of locked bin in the prison at the Prison Break finale from the prisoners. You know how the guards like to take confiscated valuables from prisoners. Maybe you find it randomly spawning on the yard or by one of the doors inside Bolingbroke, and then you have to break it open, and then you grab what's inside, and it'll get you some extra cash for the Prison Break finale. For Humane Labs, maybe experimental drugs are being worked on that might be worth a lot of money to some big pharma companies out there. And the ground team has the ability to find them and steal them for extra cash for the Humane Labs finale. When it comes to Series A funding, perhaps in the warehouse, Trevor has stashed an extra bag of cash that you can find. Just run around the warehouse, and then eventually maybe you'll find that extra bag of cash. It won't be as much as the finale bag, maybe like half that value, but still it'd be extra cash for players to earn doing Series A funding. And for Pacific Standard, there are these ATMs that are at the front door. Maybe you have the ability to hack all the ATMs, and maybe each ATM pays out an additional $20,000, $25,000. Or perhaps there's some gold bars laying around down in the vault for you to loot as well for a little bit of extra cash for the pack standard finale. One of the ways that we're going to hopefully be able to do these missions with 2 players or 3 players instead of a mandatory 4 players will be the ability for us to hire NPCs in support roles. There will basically be 2 categories, drivers, gunmen. There'll be 2 different levels of NPCs, generic NPCs made specifically for these heists, and they'll start off with a lower skill set, say 5%, and then you'll also have the ability to use legendary NPCs that you've either unlocked already throughout GTA Online or have the ability to go unlock by purchasing certain businesses or certain RNG events like rescuing Packy in order to make them available as legendary NPCs for your heists. The drivers would include for legendary Eddie Toe, Taliana Martinez, Hal, Kareem Dins. The gunmen would include Packy, Chester McCoy, Charlie, Marcel, Gustavo, Daryl Jones, just to name a few examples of legendary NPCs, drivers, gunmen that you could hire for the minimum 15% finale payout for these 4 heists. Obviously, they would also be usable for the various setups, and the generics would start off with like a 5% level in skill. The legendaries would start off in 10%, and every setup you use an NPC for and complete, they'll gain 1% in the setup stats. They'll gain 2% for every finale that they complete with you. You will have the ability to rank up your NPCs all the way from the Humane Lab setup all the way to the Pacific Standard finale. Now, once you complete the entire series of heists, wrapping it up with Pacific Standard, then you will basically start completely over, and those NPC stats will reset back to 5% for generic, 10% for legendary. Should you decide to start over with the heist again, from Fleeca, all the way through to Pack Standard. The hired NPCs will not die during setups and finales, which won't cause the mission to fail. However, they might take too much damage and will need to be revived, but that's not mandatory. If you don't revive the NPC and you leave them behind to complete the setup or the finale, they will no longer be available for this series of heists until you either cancel the heist or restart the heist or reset the heist. They won't be an option for future setups or finales until you do one of those things like restart, reset, or just complete all the remaining heists, including Pack Standard. Obviously, there's going to be missions where you want to have the gunman NPCs for that support role to help you as gunman, and then there's going to be some missions that may require a driver NPC instead, with you being the gunner or you being in a separate vehicle. And hopefully, if Rockstar did go this route with the NPCs, they would follow this example and not make it to where the ally NPCs become a liability. For the most part, you may not need to use an NPC in a lot of these setups, but you might have to hire NPCs for the finales. But the goal is to make these optional between 2 to 4 players instead of 4 players mandatory. Some setups finales might require 1 to 2 NPC allies. And for the finales, the NPCs will automatically take the 15% minimum cut. And obviously, they're going to be used for the support, the easiest jobs and roles throughout these setups and finales. Extra setups might have to be added for 2 to 3 player finale options. We'll go over that in a moment. The hired gun NPCs can't be killed by other NPCs, but might have to be revived if they take too much damage. And it would be really cool if you had the ability to decide what loadout you wanted the NPCs to use, like an assault rifle or a machine gun or a shotgun. And maybe you can actually give them an extra body armor so they can take additional damage. So let's start the rework off with Prison Break. We're going to go in order from Prison Break to Humane Labs, Series A, along with Pacific Standard. So for Prison Break, we have these setups: plane, bus, the station, wet work, which is the assassination setups. So these are pretty easy. I think all these can be done with just 2 players or 3 players without hiring the NPCs, which would be optional. The plane one, obviously 2 players. You roll in and probably an armored Kuruma. You kill the Vagos. I think it's the Vagos. You steal the plane. Mission accomplished. Something similar with the bus and the station. 2 players could do this. One player goes into the police station as a cop. The other one goes to the docks and steals the car. And then for wet work, the same thing. You could have 1 player go and assassinate 1 target, and then the other player go assassinate the other target. But I think that players, if they had the option to hire the gunmen or driver NPCs to help them out, I think a lot of players probably would take advantage of the ally NPCs, especially if Rockstar does a decent job and doesn't make them a liability or make them to where they can easily be killed and fail the mission. So I don't want them to be a liability. I just want them to be helpful to some degree. Now, when it comes to the Prison Break finale, there's going to be an extra setup if you do this with 2 to 3 players instead of 4 players. The extra setup will involve a text message from Agent 14, and I think that's a way to work around some of the additional cutscenes or voice work so that Rockstar doesn't have to bring somebody else in to do voice work. They could just send you a text message like, hey, since you're doing this with only 2 or 3 people, you're going to need to go steal a car. So for the extra Prison Break setup, instead of using the buzzard, because we're not going to be using the buzzard with 2 or 3 players, you're going to go steal a 4-door car. It might be a specific 4-door car in a specific location in Los Santos. You pick it up, you drive to a location not far from where you're going to jump out of the plane in the finale. And so you would theoretically parachute out of the plane, land by the car, hop into the car, and then drive back to LS. That's how the finale for Prison Break would wrap up. So there'd be no demo team, no buzzard, and basically you would only have the prison team and the plane team. The prison team would be the ones that take out that extra bus, and then they would go get the other bus and then drive into the prison. The plane team would go get the airplane, fly around Blaine County near the prison, and because you don't have the buzzard, Fort Zancudo would not be alerted, therefore no fighter jets to deal with. But the pilot of the Velum is still going to have to land the plane under a wanted level where there's helicopters and sheriff's deputies chasing the team that's fleeing from the prison, whether it's 1 player, 1 ally NPC, or 2 other players if it's a 3-person Prison Break finale. And everything else goes down the same way. You jump in the plane, you fly off, you parachute. Instead of the buzzard, you land by the car, you get in the car, you drop back to LS. Prison Break finale complete. When it comes to Humane Labs, here are the setups: key codes, Insurgent, Hydra, which is the EMP mission, the Valkyrie mission, the Deliver EMP mission back to Humane Labs. And I think that these could probably be done with 2 or 3 really good players. Optional 1 to 2 hired NPCs in support roles. Now for the finale for Humane Labs, I think this might be one of the easier finales to knock out with 2 players or 3 players. You could theoretically have a ground team of 1 player with 1 NPC, or 2 players. And up in the Valkyrie, you would have the pilot serving both roles, the pilot and the gunner. And whenever you switch from pilot to gunner in the Valkyrie, it would go into autopilot and would automatically aim the helicopter towards the nearest enemy helicopter for you as the gunner to take out, and then switch back into the pilot role. Once the ground team has successfully got through the drainage out into the ocean and onto the beach, and they fired out the flare, obviously the pilot would land the Valkyrie as usual, and then one of the ground team players would jump into the gunner role in order to use the gun on the Valkyrie in order to wrap up the Humane Labs mission. So it would pretty much go down the same way, with the exception of mandatory 4 players. It would be 2 to 4 players. The difference maker here is that autopilot for the Valkyrie. That would make all the difference in the world for the pilot with their ability to switch back and forth from pilot to gunner. The next one's going to be a little bit more challenging. Series A funding. The setups are Coke, which would be boat only. So if it's 2 to 3 players, everyone would just jump into the boat and drive up to the yacht instead of the helicopter. For Trash Talk, the operators, collectors role would be combined. So you would drive and pick up the garbage, or the driver would just drive. And maybe if you have NPCs, they would just chill in the back and they would offer covering fire while the passenger gets out and collects the garbage, quote unquote. Bikers is pretty easy. All you got to do is go steal 2 vans. So you can do that with 2 to 3 players. And if you want an NPC or 2 NPCs to go with you for support, you can do that as well. The more challenging ones is going to be the weed mission at the sawmill versus the ballas, because most of the time you have to pick up 2 Bensons as well as the technical. So I guess it would depend on your loadout when it comes to the weed mission. You could have 2 players, gunman NPC as well as a driver NPC, and the players drive the Bensons and the NPCs take care of the technical for the weed mission. And when it comes to the meth setup mission, I think that you could probably do that with 2 players. And if you need 2 NPCs to go with you, probably 2 gunner NPCs to help give you some fire support. Now, when it comes to the finale of Series A funding, it would pretty much go down the same way. You have to protect the warehouse from everyone attacking the warehouse. Then you jump in the convoy with Trevor, and the players would drive the Bensons. And once again, you would have the NPCs handle the technical, a good NPC gunner, as well as an NPC driver. Or if you prefer, maybe you can just select 2 NPC drivers and have them drive the Bensons, and then you and another player are in the technical. And perhaps you could do the same thing for the weed mission and have 2 driver NPCs go with you, and you and another player, once again, also man the technical against the ballers that are going to be coming after you. So they could do the same thing for the weed mission as they do for the Series A funding mission. And I like the idea of options when it comes to deciding, okay, do I want to go in with 1 gunner, 1 driver, 2 gunmen, or 2 drivers, depending on your preference throughout these setups and finales. And the big mission, the Pacific Standard mission, the setups vans, which is really easy. This one obviously can be done with 2 players. Signal, a little bit more challenging, but can also theoretically be done with 2 players, because all too often, a lot of players will just stay back on the island and chill while everyone else hops into the boat and goes to the ocean, down the river, to Alamo Sea, and to the drop-off point. So this could be done with 2 players and maybe 2 gunmen NPCs in support roles. The hack mission might require 2 gunmen to go with you. 1 player would serve as the decoy, and the other player would serve as the one that's doing the hacking aspect of that mission. When it comes to convoy, it's a very challenging mission, but it could be doable with 2 players. But one of the cool things about having the ability to hire gunmen or driver NPCs is you could actually make that work for you one way or the other, whether or not you have the driver of the barracks be an NPC, or have a player be a driver with gunmen NPCs riding shotgun, and then the other player in a militarized vehicle behind them with perhaps another NPC riding with them. Now, the final setup is one of the more controversial setups in Pacific Standard. And I'm going to make a change here and make the bikes an optional mission. I'm going to make it to where if you want to go the bikes route, you can. However, a lot of us would love to have the ability to once again use the armored Kuruma. I know that was a glitch that Rockstar patched. How about instead of having it patched, Rockstar, you just make an extra setup mission where we have to go find the Kuruma that Eddie Toad ditched at the end of the Fleeca finale. Maybe another gang has found it and they've taken it to their base and they're intending on using it for something. And we have to go to their base and we have to get the armored Kuruma back. And then once we get the armored Kuruma back, we have to go get it fixed. And then we have to park it in a specific spot right before we launch the finale of the Pacific Standard Heist. That way, it would allow players to use the armored Kuruma instead of those motorcycles, which most of us hate to do. Which ties us into the finale of Pacific Standard, which would be 2 to 3 players with the ability to hire 1 to 2 NPCs, gunmen for crowd control. That way the 2 players would do everything else from hacking, demo work, all the way down to the vault and loot the money. And then they would either escape via the bikes or the armored Kuruma. And if the armored Kuruma is added as an extra mission that you could theoretically do, and this would be for like 2 to 4 players, so even 4 players would be able to do this extra mission if they feel so inclined. I think more people would probably go with the armored Kuruma mission setup as opposed to the bikes. So that's pretty much how I would rework these heist setups and finales, making it to where you could do these heists and the setups theoretically with 2 players from the very beginning, with Fleeka, Felisa, all the way to the pack standard finale, with the option of hiring 2 additional NPCs in support roles, whether they're as drivers or gunmen. Your thoughts, views, and opinions regarding the rework for heists? And what are some of your ideas how Rockstar could rework the heists to make them better or more doable for 2 to 4 players instead of it being mandatory 4 players for Prison Break, Humane Labs, as well as Series A funding, pack standard? And what ideas do you have to improve the heists in order to make them doable with 2 to 4 players instead of mandatory 4 players? As always, welcome below in the comments section.